I found a key in my coat pocket this morning, but I've never seen it before in my life. And when I showed it to a stranger on the street, he burst into tears and called me by a name I haven't heard in 40 years. I found a key in my coat pocket this morning, one I swear I had never seen before in my life. Yet the moment my fingers closed around its cold metal shape, something deep inside me shivered like an old door shifting on rusty hinges. And when I showed it to a stranger on the street, older man with trembling hands, he burst into tears and called me by a name I hadn't heard in 40 years. And that was the moment my entire world began to tilt, as if everything I thought I understood about my past had been built on foundations that were never real to begin with. I stood there, frozen, staring at the man as he whispered that forgotten name again. Elias, a name that felt foreign and familiar at the same time, like a word from a language I once knew as a child but lost over time. And as he reached out to touch the key, his fingers hovered just above mine as if he feared the metal might burn him. "Where did you find this?" he asked with a trembling voice, and all I could say was, "In my pocket." This morning, the man staggered back as though I'd struck him, covering his mouth with a shaking hand, whispering, "It's happening. It's finally happening." And before I could ask what he meant, he turned and began walking away now, not walking, but limping, with a desperation that suggested he was fleeing from something only he could see. For a moment I stood there in the cold morning air, holding the key and wondering if perhaps I was losing my mind, because the weight of it felt wrong, too heavy for something so small, like it carried the gravity of a past I couldn't remember. The key itself was Alderan, not steel engraved with delicate swirling patterns that time had softened but not erased. And at the top, just beneath the bow, was a tiny symbol, a crescent moon intersected by a straight line. Something I instinctively knew I had seen before, though the memory danced just out of reach, like a dream fading the moment I tried to recall it. I slipped the key back into my pocket and hurried after the man, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. But by the time I turned the corner, he had disappeared into the morning crowd as if he had never existed at all, leaving me alone with a feeling that something old, something buried had begun to wake inside me. I walked for almost an hour, my mind spiraling with questions, until finally I sat down on a bench near the park, the same bench where I used to rest during long walks when life felt heavier than I could handle. And as I sat there staring at my reflection in the metal surface of the key, a strange memory now, more like the shadow of a memory, flickered behind my eyes. A dimly lit room, shelves lined with books, the sound of a woman's voice telling me, "Don't forget," and the feeling of someone pressing something into my palm. I shook my head hard, trying to dispel the vision, because I had never been in a room like that, at least not in any life I remembered. The cold wind bit at my face, and I closed my eyes, trying to breathe, trying to ground myself in reality. But the moment I opened them, I saw him, the same man from before, standing across the street, watching me. His face was pale, his posture strained, as if he were holding back tears. Slowly, cautiously, he approached, stopping a few feet away, his voice cracking as he said, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have run. It's just that seeing that key again after so many years, it broke something in me." He gestured for permission to sit, and I nodded, though every part of me remained tense, unsure whether this man was dangerous or simply haunted by something I didn't yet understand. He sat beside me with a slow, painful breath. "My name is Thomas," he said, "and I knew you once. Before all of this." I blinked. "Before what?" He closed his eyes, as if gathering the courage to unravel decades of silence. Before your life was rewritten, my stomach dropped. What are you talking about? He motioned toward the key. That belonged to you, the real you, the you before they took everything away. I stared at him, horrified and confused. Who took what away from me? He hesitated. Your memories, your name, your past. I let out a shaky laugh, though nothing about the situation felt funny. This is crazy, I said. I've lived my whole life knowing exactly who I am. Thomas shook his head slowly, sadly. No, Robin. You lived the life they gave you. A good life, yes. A safe one, but not the one you were born into. His words sent a cold ripple through my entire body. Why would anyone erase my past? I asked. He reached again for the key, but stopped short of touching it, because you knew something you weren't supposed to know. Something dangerous. Something they feared. My heart pounded. Who is they? He looked around nervously, as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows. People who believed the past could be rewritten. People who believed truth was optional if it preserved their power. I opened my mouth to protest again, but he held up a shaking hand. I don't expect you to believe me yet. Recovered memories don't return easily. They come in flashes, small pieces. What you felt earlier, that was the beginning. Beginning of what? Of remembering who Elias was. The name struck me again, this time harder, echoing somewhere deep inside me like a forgotten melody struggling to surface. I'm not Elias, I insisted. You were, he whispered. Before the fire, before the disappearance, before the program. The world narrowed to a pinpoint. What program? Thomas looked down, folding his hands tightly. A program that aimed to remove traumatic memories in children. You were part of the first group, but something went wrong. I felt my chest tighten. How do you know all this? His answer made my blood run cold. Because I was there. I stared at him for a long moment, unable to speak, unable to breathe. He continued. The key opens a door in what remains of the old facility. A door only you could open. A door that leads to the truth they buried. I shook my head. If what you're saying is real, why now? Why come to me after all these years? He inhaled sharply. Because time is running out. The facility is scheduled for demolition in 3 days. And when it's gone, your past will be erased forever. A sudden wave of dizziness hit me. The world felt unstable, like a photograph slipping in and out of focus. You want me to go there? I said. Don't you? He nodded. Because you asked me to. The day before they wiped your memory, you gave me that key and said, if I ever forget, bring me back. My heart hammered against my ribs. I said that. Yes, Thomas whispered, eyes wet, and I promised I would. A long silence settled between us. Cars passed, people walked by, life continued, oblivious to the unraveling happening inside me. Finally, I asked, what's behind the door? Thomas looked at me with an expression so heavy it almost broke me. The part of your life you weren't supposed to survive. My hands trembled as I stood. The key felt impossibly heavy, like it carried the gravity of an entire lifetime I had lost. Thomas stood as well. If you come with me, he said quietly, you'll remember everything. But once you open that door, there's no going back. I stared at the key in my palm, then at the man who seemed to know me better than I knew myself. Tomorrow morning, I said. Meet me here." He nodded once. "I'll be here." As I walked away, the weight of the key pressed against my heart with every step, whispering truths I wasn't ready to face. And though I didn't want to admit it, one thought echoed in my mind over and over. What if he's right? What if the life I remember wasn't mine at all? The next morning, when I returned to the bench with the key in my pocket, the world felt dimmer somehow, as if the colors had drained overnight while I slept, leaving everything coated in a pale grey uncertainty. And as I waited for Thomas, every passing face made me wonder if anyone else knew something about my life that I didn't. If I had walked through decades, trusting memories that were never mine. And when he finally appeared, moving slowly, his eyes shadowed by something deeper than age, I felt a strange mix of dread and relief. Because even though I didn't fully trust him, he was the only person who seemed to actually know who I had been before the life I remembered began. We walked without speaking, our steps echoing through quiet morning streets until we reached the edge of the industrial zone, a part of town that had been abandoned for years, its buildings hollow and broken like forgotten skeletons of another era. And as we approached the remains of a large concrete structure, my heart began to pound with a force that made breathing difficult. "This was the facility," Thomas said softly. "At least, what's left of it." The place was half collapsed, metal beams jutting into the sky like rusted bones, and broken windows reflected little pieces of sunlight that flickered like memories struggling to surface. And as we slipped through a gap in the fence, I felt something shift inside me, a strange pressure in my chest, as if my mind recognized a place my conscious memory did not. Thomas led me to a back corner of the building where a partially buried door lay hidden behind a pile of debris. "It's still here," he whispered. "After all these years." My hands trembled as I pulled the key from my pocket, the metal now warm from being pressed against my skin. "This door," I asked, "what's behind it?" Thomas hesitated, and in that hesitation I sensed everything he hadn't said, the fear, the weight, the truth. "Your beginning," he replied, "and the end of the life they built for you." I slid the key into the lock, and the moment the metal touched the mechanism, a shock pulsed up my arm, sharp and electric, like my body remembered something my mind couldn't. And with a slow, heavy turn, the lock clicked open, echoing through the empty building like the sound of a memory breaking free. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. A familiar sensoral, metallic, almost like old hospital rooms, rose up, triggering a wave of dizziness that forced me to grip the wall. "Take your time," Thomas murmured, but I shook my head and stepped forward. Because some part of me, some deeper version of myself, needed to know the truth, no matter how painful. The air grew colder as we descended, each step stirring dust that glittered faintly in the narrow beams of light slipping through cracks above. And when we reached the bottom, I found myself standing in a small underground corridor lined with doors, each labeled with a number. My breath caught as I saw one of the doors near the end, Dit's paint peeling, its handle rusted, but its number unmistakable. E17. My pulse quickened. "What is this?" I whispered, but Thomas didn't answer. Instead, he nodded toward the door, urging me to open it. The handle resisted for a moment, then gave way, revealing a small room with a single metal cot, a desk, and walls covered in faded drawings that sent a jolt through me. Because even though I had no memory of making them, my hand recognized the style, the lines, the shapes. One drawing in particular caught my eye. A child standing under a crescent moon intersected by a straight line, the same symbol on the key. My knees weakened. I lived here, I whispered, didn't I? Thomas nodded, eyes glistening. For 3 years. Why don't I remember any of it? His jaw tightened. Because they didn't want you to. I stepped deeper into the room, my fingers brushing the cold metal cot, and as I touched it, a flash exploded in my mind. A younger version of myself curled under a thin blanket, crying softly into my hands, while a voice behind the door whispered, "He's not ready yet. Increase the dosage tomorrow." I staggered back, gasping, gripping the wall for support. What did they do to me? Thomas swallowed hard. They tested the memory suppression serum on you. You were the only subject who survived the early trials. You were resilient. Too resilient. So they erased everything. Not erased, he corrected. Buried. I sank onto the cot, the air thick and suffocating. Why would they need to bury my life? Thomas approached cautiously, his voice fragile. Because you witnessed something. Something they needed to hide forever. What did I see? I whispered. Thomas hesitated. Do you hear that? I frowned. Hear what? Listen. At first, I heard nothing. Then barely audible, soft humming sound, like a machine struggling to live again after decades of silence. We followed the sound down another corridor until we reached a larger room, its walls lined with old equipment covered in sheets and dust. In the center of the room stood a metal examination chair, rusted and worn, with thick straps dangling from its sides. A projector-like device loomed above it, wires snaking across the floor. My breath hitched. This is where they used it, Thomas said. On you, on the others. I stepped closer, every instinct screaming for me to turn back. But something else, something deeper pulled me, toward the chair as if my body remembered sitting there. And the moment my fingers brushed the cold metal, a memory detonated inside me with blinding force. I was back in the chair, strapped down, my wrists burning against the restraints, a bright light above me, voices around me like muffled thunder, a man's silhouette leaning close to my face, whispering, "You saw too much. Elias, you won't remember after tonight." I thrashed, screaming, "No," but my voice was swallowed by the hum of the machine. Then darkness. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. Thomas caught my arm. "Robin," he called me Elias. I whispered, my voice trembling. "He called me Elias." Thomas nodded. "That was your name before they changed it." My heart pounded with an ache so deep it felt carved into me. "Who was he?" "The director," Thomas said quietly. "The man who ran the program. Where is he now?" Thomas looked away. "Gone, but his legacy remains." I shook my head. This doesn't make sense. Why would they go to such lengths to erase my life? Thomas hesitated, then turned toward a small metal cabinet in the corner of the room. He opened it slowly, pulling out a dusty file. "Because you were the only one who survived the fire." The room tilted. "What fire?" He handed me the file, his hands shaking. "The fire that destroyed the program. The fire that killed the other children. The fire you started." My blood froze. What? "You tried to save them," Thomas said. "But the director locked you all in the lower wing. You broke free, grabbed a torch, and tried to burn through the wooden barrier blocking the exit. But the fire spread too fast. My knees buckled. I killed them." "No," Thomas said firmly. You saved the ones you could, and you tried to save the others. What happened wasn't your fault, it was his. I clutched the file, my vision blurring. Why didn't I remember any of this? Because you begged them not to let you remember. My heart dropped. I asked for this. Thomas nodded slowly. You said the guilt would destroy you. You said you'd rather live a new life than carry the weight of the old one. And they agreed. I sank to the floor, the world spinning. Then why bring me back now? Why make me remember? Thomas knelt beside me, tears streaming down his face. Because you left me behind. I looked at him, confused. What do you mean? He pointed to the file. Look inside. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. 2 children sitting under a crescent moon symbol. One was me. The other was Thomas. And written on the back, in my handwriting, were the words, "If I forget, find me. Bring me home, my breath caught." Thomas sobbed. You were my brother, Elias, not by blood, but by everything that mattered. I stared at him, stunned. I left you. No, he whispered. You saved me, but they took you away before you could wake up. They put you in a new life, and I waited. For decades. I waited. I reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. Thomas, you opened the door, he said softly. You came back. The silence between us softened, and for the first time that day, my heart felt something like belonging, something like truth, something like home. I took a deep, shaking breath. What do we do now? Thomas smiled through tears. We rebuild the life they took from us. I nodded slowly. Together, and as we walked out of that broken place, out of the shadows of a life I was never meant to remember, I felt something inside me settle into place, as if 2 halves of myself had finally reunited. And if you felt something too, if you've ever wondered what forgotten part of your past is waiting for you, then stay with me, because the next chapter of this journey begins with you. Like, comment, subscribe. Let's remember together.